what represents for you your absolute truth, absolute love, absolute responsibility. You can see it as being your higher power, your God, your ancestors, your belief system in something more than your mind, the logic and rationality of your mind. What you then do, I'm going to use your word, is then you have shifted the absolute connection from here to something far more. You have shifted the power from your mindset to something more. You have shifted the reference point, the benchmark, from your mindset to something far, far, far more powerful than who you and I are. You've formed a connection with something far more. Be wary that many of us endeavor to make this the absolute connection, absolute power, some entity sometimes which has just deluded us as to their power. And therein we all end up then dying for a cause which has no value. Like sometimes, let's say it in terms of people in politics, they'll put up a position, be it in this country, in another country, in every single country in the world, and says, this is worthwhile dying for. And if you look in hindsight, 10, 20 years later, was it actually worth even lifting your finger for it? Do you understand what I mean? Right? Because we put some entity as representing the absolute truth, but they don't. All right? I'm going to give you a practical example of that. So there's a famous writer named Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse won the Nobel Prize for Literature for a book called Siddhartha. But the book that I most enjoy of his is a book called And the War Goes On. Okay? And very fascinatingly, it's a capture of his writings from the First World War up till the Second World War. Hermann Hesse, during that time, was a journalist, and he witnessed the atrocities of the First World War, the bloodshed, the deaths, the torment, the disease, anything and everything. And if you've seen old video footage or movies made about the First World War, you saw the trenches and sleeping in that mire, literally, and having to race through the mud and probably get shot dead in the process. That was the nature of the war. And he witnessed this, and he was German, so he witnessed it from the German side, who lost the war. And he writes at a deep level about what he had seen and witnessed and captured on paper. And at some point, Hermann Hesse describes the negative nature of war, and he comes out in his writings as, one might argue, detesting the concept of war. And this was during the war. The First World War was from 1914 to 18, and then into the 1920s and 1930s. And something very interesting was happening in Germany. If you and I know a little bit about the history, was the Nazi Party in Germany was getting far more powerful. As you and I know, the Nazi Party was, we'll say, responsible for the Second World War. And they were preparing for war. They were building a huge army, weapons, and here's a person, a journalist who wrote very well in Germany at the time. That was that social media platform, the newspaper, was writing against war. How did the Nazi Party view him? As a non-patriot, as someone that was against the fatherland of Germany. Hermann Hesse, so as much as most people in the country at that time placed the Nazi Party as the center point of their lives, made them the absolute connection, gave it power, the benchmark, the reference point. There's a lone individual writing against war. And they say you are not patriotic, you are against the fatherland. And when you read Hermann Hesse's writings, he describes his pain, hurt, and suffering because he saw himself as patriotic. He loved Germany. He cared for Germany. It was the land he was born in. It got so bad, he had to flee into exile. he fled to Switzerland. He continued writing against war. Lo and behold, we had the Second World War. And there your country then takes up arms against all others. And you fighting against the whole concept of war. You have to leave behind your family, your friends who are part of the Nazi party. And you are a lone individual. You are disconnected. You are told, go into exile. Well, they didn't even tell him he had to flee into exile. That complete disconnection, that's how some of us feel. He must have, and if you read his writings, you can notice the pain, the hurt, the suffering, and some might argue he might have even gone through a state of depression in that space. Because the very people he loved and cared for had decided that he was against them. All the entities that he might have placed around his mind, his family, his friends at some level, had turned against him. And we all know, if we watch and learnt about history, that Germany lost the war. And if you take us now in this present day, if a country declares war against some foreign power, you and I are not in a hurry to say, yes, we will take the position of the country against another country. We may even differ from it. Right? And if our country decides that we're going to have a national conscription service where we all have to go partake of the army, I think there'll be a huge number of us emigrating. You agree? Even to Zimbabwe or Lesotho or any neighboring country. Why? Because we may not even agree with who they are fighting against. We'll hold opinion against it. And in some ways, one might have to say we have to thank people like Hermann Hesse, who were one of the first few people to and put his voice to it and wrote about it. It doesn't mean, patriotism doesn't mean fighting a war that is aimless. He became completely disconnected from his people because he served a more powerful connection, which is one of truth, and I like to use the word one of love. Because he did not necessarily enjoy the atrocities of war, where one person killed another. He stood for absolute love, absolute truth, absolute responsibility. Since the Second World War, we've established things like the United Nations, peacekeeping forces, in an endeavor to facilitate connection with human beings. One of the most powerful things we've seen of late is where countries go through a lot of carnage, chaos. But it's amazing, as much as sometimes we feel we are forced to take sides, it's powerful to see people spreading the message of peace, collaboration, and unity. And that's what we all must aim for. Because therein you form the most powerful connection, not just with yourself, but with everyone on this planet. In fact, we might say everything in this universe. To recognize we are all part of one whole, rather than sticking to one opinion, one vested interest and agenda. Yes, you may still be judged. You may still be criticized. But you know you are holding on to something that can never be taken away. That is far more powerful. And if you think of it, therein lies a true legacy. Because you are holding on to a purpose, a truth, a meaning that is not just popular for 1 day or 2 days or 3. It is popular forever. It is a legacy that will stand infinitely and eternally. And if you think of it, truly great people's legacy lasts more than that lifetime. It lasts lifetimes. It's not about getting popularity. It's about finding out who you authentically are, and it's in alignment with the truth, the love, the responsibility that goes beyond just the tribe, which may last for a day, a month, a year, or a generation. Because that's what you and I are fundamentally, authentically connected to. We all have a genetic wiring, a DNA wiring that comes from generations before, thousands of generations, and it's going to carry through for generations ahead. And in order to sustain itself, that which sustains itself is that which can survive. And it only will survive if it's based on eternal and infinite principles, values. And even let's use the word love. So rather than pleasing a particular person, particular individual, is to live up to a truth, a value. And if you please that concept, you are pleasing all of who you are. So rather than being limited, pushed into a box of how you think you're supposed to behave because society says so, break free of that box. Let go of those limitations and allow yourself to manifest and express as you truly meant to be, in cahoots with, one might argue, the universe, something far more than that small tribe. Yes, it's allowed you to sustain itself for the first few years of your life and keeps you going and allows us to communicate and get by. But life is not just about getting by, it's about being alive to the full extent of who you are. And manifest and express all of what you are. We are not meant to live in the shadow only of a mindset, of a society that maybe 20, 30 odd years from now may not even exist.